From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
I think to work in the emergency department, it takes a particular person. It takes somebody who functions well under stress, who can deal with the chaos, who can see multiple patients at one time, and who can juggle multiple things at a time. And not everybody's cut out for that, and that's okay. But if you are cut out for it, you're a special person, and you belong in the emergency department.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 28th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the ENP certificate. Joining us here in the studio to talk more about it is Lapina Sharp McHenry, Dean of UNMC's College of Nursing. Her colleague, Haley Hayes, joins us via Zoom from Scotts Bluff. The interim assistant dean of the UNMC College of Nursing, West Nebraska Division, Dr. Hayes developed the program. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
You're welcome.
You bet. I want to start with you, Doctor.
Yes.
How do you define an emergency care provider?
You know, when you think about an emergency care provider, you think of someone that has been prepared educationally and trained to provide emergency care services. And those services could occur in mostly emergency departments, could be in urgent care, could be in critical care access hospitals, but those individuals are particularly equipped to take care of those individuals in life-threatening situations, whether that's individuals that's experienced some type of trauma, some type of injury.
Okay, and we're talking about emergency nurse practitioners today.
That is correct.
What makes them unique to the emergency care provider setting?
I think what's really unique about this nurse practitioner is that these are individuals that are already family nurse practitioners. That's who we're targeting. So they're going to be coming back to complete a certificate as an emergency nurse practitioner. So as their family nurse practitioner training, they've already been prepared for primary care across the lifespan. Now you couple this with the emergency nurse practitioner certificate. Now they're able to provide those types of services in primary care, but also in those emergency care settings. So really with that dual certification, they're really primed to be able to meet a critical need that we have here in the state.
Okay, talk a little bit more about those settings, if you would.
Those settings could occur most likely in an emergency department. It could be in an urgent care center. It could also be in emergency medical services, you know, a mobile unit where these individuals could be practicing. But something that we're seeing now is we're seeing more of these emergency nurse practitioners that are helping with natural disasters. They're also in public emergencies that are happening across the country. So these individuals are really primed to be able to step in, bring their expertise to the table, and work within an interdisciplinary team to be able to provide those emergency services.
Wow, we want to put up a graphic for our viewers, and as we're doing that, the American Association of Nurse Practitioners has said that, you know, these folks are really in high demand. I mean, we can see from the numbers here, the need is growing, but doctor, we don't seem to have enough men and women to fill that. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. You know, we're experiencing a nursing shortage across the country, and we're experiencing it here in Nebraska as we are in other states. And that demand continues to grow for this particular type of nurse practitioner. But you're right, the supply continues to be short. So there are many efforts underway across the country of doing a better job of recruiting individuals into nursing as a whole. And then we hope that as those individuals complete that educational program, that they'll go on to graduate programs, become nurse practitioners, and then be able to seek this emergency nurse practitioner training. So there is a concerted effort nationally as well as here at UNMC of being very intentional about recruiting and really increasing the visibility of the opportunities in the nursing profession to really to bring more of those students in at those entry levels and then hopefully moving them through to that graduate level to where they would prepare themselves for these nurse practitioner roles.
Okay, bring that critical shortage home to Nebraska? Maybe it's by giving us a few for examples, but really, how is that impacting our state?
Well, I will tell you, this year alone, we're short over 5,400 nurses here in the state of Nebraska alone. So we need more nurses. And if all of our nursing programs here in the state were to be at capacity, we still wouldn't fill that gap. So we are really thinking about what are innovative ways that we can think about doing a better job of educating and recruiting more nurses into the profession. Here at UNMC, one of the things we've done is we've added a second admission cycle. Traditionally, we've admitted in the fall of every year, but now on our Kearney campus and on our Lincoln campus, we're admitting twice a year in order to really bolster the workforce here in Nebraska. And we're in the process of now to begin recruiting for admitting for a spring admission in our Omaha campus. So we are looking at how we can increase our capacity in order to meet some of that shortage needs.
Yeah, and you have this ENP certificate program, which sounds very exciting. You know, high level, what is that really going to be all about?
Well, I will tell you how that came about. I've been here in Nebraska now since 2023. And when I arrived in Nebraska, I spent a lot of time traveling around the state, meeting with our clinical partners, community leaders, having town halls, receptions, really to get to know the state and to understand what were the needs of the various towns and communities throughout Nebraska. And what I learned is west of North Platte is pretty frontier here in Nebraska. It's very rural, and the need for healthcare services don't mirror what we have here on the eastern border of the state. And one of the things I learned when I talked to CEOs of the critical access and community-based hospitals is the need for emergency healthcare providers. Many of them were having to make decisions about whether or not to even maintain their emergency rooms because they didn't have providers to staff them. And so I took that back to my team, and specifically Dr. Hayes, because she's a dually certified emergency nurse practitioner, to say, what can we do to help address this need that is existing throughout our state? And so she had birthed this idea of the Emergency Nurse Practitioner Certificate and began to work on it, and she'll tell you more about that here shortly. But we identified there was a clear need. We figured out how we could meet that need. And so now here we are today talking about the program that's been developed and ready to be launched soon.
Well, and what makes it even better is I'm understanding from what I've read that this is fitting into the University of Nebraska's long range plan.
Absolutely.
Right? Always a plan, and
Absolutely.
This is fitting in how?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that we are committed to doing at UNMC is making sure, first of all, that we're student focused, as well as the University of Nebraska system. We're all about making sure we're creating educational pathways and educational programs and degree programs that will prepare our students and equip them to be able to go and have really fulfilling careers. This does that, but it also meets another one of our long-term goals, and that is to be engaged in the community, to make sure that we're partnering with the community, that we're listening to our community partners, and that we're addressing those specific needs that exist throughout the state. And this really fills a critical need.
Well, you are obviously very passionate about this, and we appreciate that. I'm sure I would, the viewers would agree with me on that. I have to ask, how did you wind up here?
Well, I was in Boston before coming here, and I received an email one day that there was an academic health center in the Midwest that was looking for a dean, and inquired if I was interested in having a conversation. And at the time I didn't know which academic health center it was until I had the conversation. And when I found out it was Nebraska, it was somewhat appealing because I grew up in Arkansas. So I grew up in a relatively rural state. And so when I learned that it was Nebraska and did a little bit of research on the state, I understood that there were some similarities, especially when it comes to healthcare and education. And I think that was something that was attractive to me to consider UNMC.
Well, an official welcome to you.
Thank you.
You bet. Dr. Hayes joining us all the way from Scottsbluff, Nebraska via Zoom. We're going to go ahead and bring her into the discussion now. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathy.
You bet. I want to ask you, before I ask you questions about this program that you have developed, I want to ask for you to share a little bit with our viewers about you.
Yeah, so I am a nurse practitioner. I have been a nurse practitioner since 2017, where I achieved my Doctor of Nursing, Family Nurse Practitioner from the University of Wyoming. I then went back and got my postgraduate training in emergency and trauma through Houston. And then I got a third board certification in acute care, and I have been with UNMC since 2021.
Okay, so talk with us a little bit. Where were you at the time that this was all coming down the pike? And, you know, that light bulb has to go on at some point, and you say, I think I have it. Tell us the story behind that.
So I like to think that my involvement in the development of this program really began as early as my initial interview with UNMC in 2021. I remember when I was interviewing and onboarding, I was talking about my role being an emergency nurse practitioner. And at that time, I was actively practicing as an emergency nurse practitioner in a lot of our rural facilities in Western Nebraska. And that's really where I witnessed firsthand that we had a critical need for highly skilled emergency care providers, and then really recognized that stark reality of how few qualified practitioners there were available to meet that need. And as Dean Sharp McHenry stated, you know, when she came on in 2023, she really took my goal and ambitions for UNMC in developing this program. And that is really when we started to hit this full force, just because we recognize that need. And then, as she said, as she got out into our clinical settings in the community, she also began to recognize that need. And that is just what has spearheaded this program since then.
Dr. Hayes, I have to ask, how does it feel to have come up with something like that, and then, as you're now seeing it come to fruition? I mean, that's got to be pretty amazing.
It really is just so surreal to be to this moment. Finally, this has been so much work, and beyond just me, this has really required the support from our dean and all of our college and university's leadership through multiple levels. There's been so much that we've done through needs assessment, feasibility studies, seeking out grant funding, and really finding what the needs are of this program, and then being able to make a curriculum that is going to fulfill the needs of the state. So very surreal feeling to finally be to this point where we can start to see that inaugural class within sight now.
Before we talk about the program, I want to talk about that whole idea behind collaboration, right? That collaborative spirit. You learned quite a bit, I would imagine, about a number of things. What did you learn about each other? A team like this is so important to have and to get everybody onto the same page. What did you find to be the biggest wow? I mean, this is pretty cool.
I think for the collaboration, it was really, again, addressing what the goal was of the program, identifying that need, and then really, again, it took a lot of leadership to make that vision a reality, and it has been a whole strategic process. There are moving parts of this program that you can do, and that's where a lot of that collaboration and that leadership, and Dean Sharp McHenry might be able to also add in to this statement as well, but she has been critical in the development of this program as well through her fine leadership as the dean.
Yes. Do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I will tell you, anytime you develop a program like this, it requires bringing people to the table that really are committed to what your end goal is. And I think our end goal is, as the only public College of Nursing in the state of Nebraska, is we want to ensure that what we're engaging in is going to meet a need in the state. Mm-hmm. And so when that was made clear to me, then my first thought was, what do we need to do in order to make this happen, so that we can ensure that those people that are living in the rural part of the states are able to get emergency care and not have to go 200 miles in order to get to an emergency room, but to be able to hopefully be able to maintain those emergency departments in their communities and be able to access that care. So bringing all the right people to the table in order to bring them on board, get their buy-in, and then move this forward has been essential to the success of the development of this program.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Hayes, we're going to go back to you now in Scottsbluff. This ENP certificate program, how will it be administered?
So this program will be administered over 12 months. It's a postgraduate certificate that is 16 credits. And what this is it'll be delivered online through a hybrid model where students are able to complete the didactic coursework online And then we're able to bring them to campus once a semester for hands-on learning. This is where we can develop some of the competencies and those skills that emergency nurse practitioners will need. And then they're going to be able to complete their clinical requirements in their community. So again, a hybrid program, mostly online, some hands-on in-person training sessions, and then clinical inquiry out in the communities that they are already probably serving and practicing in.
Okay, we've heard a little bit about your involvement up to this point. How do you stay involved in this then?
I think unofficially, I've probably been the specialty coordinator spearheading this program, and hopefully that'll be my role moving forward with the fruition of this program. Moving forward now, we will basically present to the Commission of Education in May, and following their approval, we will seek the national validation, which will basically ensure that our curriculum is aligning with national standards. And what that will allow is the graduates of our program to sit for their National Emergency Nurse Practitioner Board certification. Over the next several months, a lot of my development will be fine-tuning the curriculum, course development, starting to interview our incoming students for spring 2026, and continuing to basically survey all of our clinical partners, again, making sure that their needs are taken into consideration as we are developing this program.
Okay, and I do have to ask, because everything has a price, how is this program being funded?
So this program is partially funded. We received in October 2024 a grant for $122,000 from the Women Investing in Nebraska to go towards the upstart of this program.
Wow, okay. So anybody watching might think, you know, that could be for me. So talk a little bit about who would be a good candidate for this program.
Yeah, so as Dean Sharp-McHenry said, we're really starting to target family nurse practitioners. And again, it's because their academic preparation is across that lifespan. And now what we're doing is we're adding that layer of emergency and trauma training to that education that they already have. So we are targeting family nurse practitioners or family nurse practitioner students who want to gain that academic training in emergency care. Individuals that are looking to expand their scope of practice to those high acuity areas across the lifespan. So again, emergency care, trauma, these are individuals that would make great candidates for this program.
And the launch, tell us again, when are you expecting to do that? And then if you would just reiterate a little bit how long, you did talk about it, but from start to finish, what are we looking at?
Yes, so over the next few months, we'll be finalizing all of the curriculum, getting that validation. We anticipate our very first cohort to start in January 2026. And again, it's a 12-month program, so they'll start in January and they'll graduate in December of 2026.
And we're talking about how many students? How many will you accept for this first go-around?
Yeah, so for the initial cohort, we are aiming towards 10 students, preferably in-state students, because we want to grow those skilled and competent providers in Nebraska and create our preceptor pool too for future cohorts. And then each year we'll continue to expand that enrollment number. And our goal is by our third year of having this program up and running that we're able to go to twice a year admission, where we are taking a cohort not only in the spring, but also taking them in the fall. And so we're hoping that by year 5, we'll kind of be at our program capacity and able to meet the demands of our state and even surrounding regions.
Put that please in perspective for us. When you say 10 will be accepted, do you have any idea how many people are going to, want to be a part of this, will apply, will go through the process? Because that kind of gives us an idea of what that 10 really means.
Yeah, and this probably really goes back to when we did our needs assessment in 2024, and we surveyed not only nurse practitioners across the state of Nebraska, but we also surveyed some of our concurrent family nurse practitioner students and our recent graduates, seeing what that interest would be in the program. And, out of the nurse practitioners that we surveyed, I think we received about 220 responses. There was about 140 of them that were interested in looking at this academic preparation and potentially returning to get that training. Already, since the Board of Regents approved this last Friday, I have had several inquiries reach out. They want to know more about the program. They're very interested. They want to see the plan of study and how this program is going to look and how it could potentially work with their current practice obligations. And I think that's something that we've also taken into consideration, that probably a large majority of our students are already going to be practitioners out in areas where their role is very much needed, whether that's an outpatient service or primary care. And so again, we developed this program to work around and work with our providers that are already out serving these underserved communities in the state.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as you were talking there, sometimes when we apply for something and we're not one of the 10, we feel a bit discouraged, right? Which is a little frightening when you think about the shortage, right, that we've all been talking about here today. Is there anything in particular that you're going to do to recognize that and maybe try a little harder to make sure that those folks are engaged in what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, and there may be room for discussion on if the need is for more than 10 students, how are we, again, as a university, able to meet the needs of what the interest is? And so maybe that looks that we have to kind of come back to the drawing board, and maybe we need to enroll more than 10 in the first cohort, or recognize those individuals that are, interested in the program, but they're willing to wait a year to start the program as well. I think it'll be a very individualized basis for each student, because again, we always work with students based off of what their individual needs are and where they're at in their academic journey.
Yes, Dr. Sharp McHenry is wanting to add to that, Dr. Hayes. So yes, please.
One of the things that we think about when we think about capacity and how many students we're going to admit, we have to make sure we have the faculty that are qualified. And of course, Dr. Hayes, as you've just heard, has that certification, so she's qualified. But we also need to make sure we have the clinical placements. Where can those students really complete that clinical component? So we need to make sure that we have those preceptors that can precept those individuals. So if that was not an issue, of course, then we can always enroll more students. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have the qualified faculty, because we want to make sure that we're offering a premier program, that we're maintaining rigor and quality, but we also want to ensure that we have the clinical placements where those students can get that hands-on training with a preceptor.
Oh, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that. Dr. Hayes, I do want to ask you, again, Dr. Hayes is joining us via Zoom from Scotts Bluff. I want to ask Dr. Hayes, once somebody gets through this certificate program, talk about what could happen career-wise for them.
Yeah, so completing an emergency nurse practitioner certificate program, getting that board certification is really something that is going to give these graduates that specialized education and that clinical training to, again, be very skilled and competent providers. And I think what you're going to see career-wise is that this really opens a lot of opportunities in a broad range of emergency and urgent care type settings, especially in rural settings, critical access hospitals, where they could very well be solo independent providers. This program will allow for, professional advancement, long-term career versatility. Even speaking on a national level, we're starting to see that role of emergency nurse practitioners really expand, as Dean Sharp McHenry pointed out earlier in the interview, where they're starting to get more involved in services like EMS on mobile units, frontier wilderness medicine. The role of emergency nurse practitioners continue to evolve with what the needs are.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes remaining, Dr. Hayes. What work is yet to be done here? What's left for you to do before you actually get to that point?
Yeah, so we'll present to the Coordinating Commission for the Post-Secondary Education on May 16th. If it is approved here, then the College of Nursing will submit the full application for the national validation. That will go through the American Academy of Emergency Nurse Practitioners. And what that validation allows is that the graduates of the Emergency Nurse Practitioner program at UNMC to sit for that national board certification following the successful completion of the program. And in the meantime, I'll continue, again, fine-toothing that curriculum, identifying those hands-on learning, developing simulations, and really developing all of the courses so that way they are ready to go for our inaugural class.
Dr. Haley Hayes joining us all the way from Scottsbluff, Nebraska, talking about the ENP certificate program today. I want to thank you for joining us, Dr. Hayes, and I'm going to go and with one final question to your colleague here, but thank you again for joining us and best wishes.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, final thoughts. We have just a couple minutes remaining. What do you think is important for the viewers to know at this point?
I think this program is a clear example of our commitment of listening to our clinical partners, listening to the needs that exist within our state, and then coming back and figuring out what can we do to try to solve a problem. And I think this is just the beginning. I think that there will be more creative educational pathways and certificate programs that individuals can come back in and complete to be able to fill a need throughout the healthcare system here in Nebraska. So we're excited about this opportunity because we already know that it will make a difference, especially in the rural underserved areas in Nebraska, and we're excited to have a part in doing that.
So I have to ask you, if there's somebody watching today going, you know, I've always thought about being a nurse, but I never really quite. This is your opportunity to maybe just pull them right over and through the door. What would you say?
I would tell you, I've been in this profession over 4 decades, and I have loved every moment of it. And if you're looking for a career that creates just an inordinate number of opportunities, nursing is the profession that you should choose. If you're interested in making a difference in people's lives, being able to touch people at some of their most vulnerable and happiest moments, nursing is the way to go. All
right, talking about the ENP certificate program today. Folks wanting more information can go to unmc.edu/nursing, 402-559-4110. I want to thank our guests for joining us today, for our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course, to all of you for watching. As we close, a look at scenes from a rehearsal of UNO's Alice in Wonderland, as seen through the lens of Caden Weber, a junior here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours, or send an email to consider.this@unomaha.edu.